Hello. So before getting into the main subject matter of this video, I want to prefix it a bit of a explanation, I think I'll call it, for my stance on internationalism and the nature, basically, of me as an outsider commenting on the issue and my stance on that as a principle. Um, I don't know how widely this video will be seen. Previous videos I made about Thailand have went viral because there's been a big interest in some of the people I'm connected with. They've kindly shared it around and got attention to it. In fact, some of my most viewed videos. Um, but worryingly, I've noticed that a lot of the Thailand groups that I am in on Facebook aren't there. So whether they've taken themselves down or whether the authorities in Thailand have taken them down and Facebook has obliged, I don't know. But I think this has to be said anyway for record. So I hope this one gets viewed and please feel free to share it. But my stance on internationalism is as follows. Um, Countries are sovereign states. I fully understand and respect that. That's why, for example, I was wary of the European Union's federal project of a United States of Europe, although I voted for Remain. I believe countries are sovereign states. And with that comes individual cultures and context as well. That's important. Countries have different histories and different contexts. So I fully understand that not every country is going to be exactly alike, and you can't have an exact same situation in one country as another. I fully get that. I appreciate that. But I strongly reject this argument that sovereignty means a nation can do as it pleases to its own people. Or I'll rephrase that, a government can do as it pleases to its own people. If if the international community just says, well, we won't say anything because it's their business and they could do what they like, then what light is there at all for people trying to get a better future in those countries? And they really are going up against a wall because they're dealing with a dictatorship or they're dealing with extremely shackling laws like the one I'm going to talk about. How can they have any hope at all of a better future if we have the idea that that regime can just do what it likes? To me, that's a recipe for allowing genocide. It's a recipe for saying um, that if we just ignore them, they'll be contained. And I'm not saying that's the case with what I'm going to talk about. I don't think it is the case, but we know throughout history that totalitarian regimes have taken this approach. We've sort of taken this approach of saying, well, we'll just the moderates will reform internally or things will change, and then it's got out of control. We've seen this with the Third Reich in Germany, and I think we're seeing it right now with China. Um, so I take the view that if a country, if a government wants to be respected on the world stage, it has to uphold international standards. And what I'm going to talk about absolutely trashes international standards on human rights as per the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, granted, that has had amendments since, it has had much need for updates and so on, but the country I'm talking about, Thailand, wants to be seen as a normal country. It wants to be part of the international community. Um, and of course, it has this reputation pre-COVID that is of the land of smiles. Oh, Thailand, it's so wonderful. Let's go there. And that's true. It's got beautiful beaches. It's got a rich history. It's in many ways it is a beautiful country. But the report I read today is just shocking. So I'll get to the point here. A woman in Thailand has been sentenced to 43 years. 43 years. Now, what is this woman's crime? You must think with such a long sentence, with such an extremely long sentence, she must be some really evil person. She must be a child killer or a terrorist. who slaughtered dozens of people. She must be an absolute extremist. So, what's her crime? Well, I'll read this out from the BBC, and the report doesn't actually name the specific reporter here, but I'll read out the first few paragraphs. A Thai woman has been jailed for 43 years for criticising the royal family, the country's harshest ever sentence for insulting the monarchy. The former civil servant, known only as Anne Chan, posted audio clips from a podcast on social media. The 63-year-old said she had simply shared the audio files and had not commented on the content. Thailand's Lese Majeste law, which forbids any insults to the monarchy, is among the strictest in the world. Let's just be clear about this. She hasn't even given her own opinion. She simply shared this stuff. After a 3 year break, Thailand revived the controversial law last year in an attempt to curb months of anti-government protests, with demonstrators demanding changes to the monarchy. And they were some of the biggest protests against Lese Majeste I've ever seen, um, and indeed against the monarchy. I mean, protesters openly removed a plaque that was on outside one of the royal palaces, which was incredible. If you know anything about Thailand, that is truly astonishing to see that sort of bravery. Uh, Anshan pleaded guilty to 29 separate violations of sharing and posting clips on YouTube and Facebook between 2014 and 2015, her lawyer told the Reuters news agency. She was initially sentenced to 87 years, but this was cut in half because of a guilty plea. Anshan is among a group of 14 people charged with lèse majesté shortly after a military junta seized power in 2014. This is under the regime of General Prayuth. I won't say his whole name because I'm not great with Thai names and I don't want to pronounce them wrong. Vowing to stamp out criticism of the monarchy. Prayuth is a hardcore royalist. The group is accused of uploading podcasts popular in dissident circles which questioned official accounts of the monarchy. The author of the podcast served only 2 years in jail and has already been released. Now that's interesting that the actual author has got a much more lenient sentence than this woman who simply shared them. Um, and there's an analysis here by Jonathan Head of the BBC. Someone accused only of uploading these clips on social media should be given such a harsh sentence so long after the original arrests. Yes, the authorities want to send a warning to other dissidents to stop talking about the monarchy. During a wave of student-led protests last year, there was open questioning of the wealth, the political role and personal life of King Vajiralongkorn on a scale never seen in Thailand before. More than 40 mainly young activists have been charged with lèse majesté over the last few weeks, some multiple times. Until the end of last year, the law, which had been condemned by UN human rights officials as excessively severe, had been suspended for a 3 year period at the King's request. That leniency has clearly come to an end. Now, I've been following the situation in Thailand for a long time, since at least the unrest in 2010. This is a country with a long history of political coup d'etats and turnovers of power. And the fact of the matter is, lèse majesté has long been used as a political weapon in Thailand. Um, that's an interesting point that the king himself called for the law to be suspended. And I remember after the death of the last king, thinking this might actually be a changing point, because King Rama the Ninth, that was the last king, um, King Bhumibol, was absolutely revered. He was basically a living deity in Thailand. You know, anyone that knows anything about Thailand will know his portrait was everywhere. This wasn't just a normal monarchy. This was absolutely a personality cult. Um, Anti-royalists, in my experience, are among the most extreme, intolerant people I've ever come across. I'm talking about the hardcore royalists. I'm not talking about the average Thai who respects the monarchy because they have to. I'm talking about the hardcore royalists who are prepared to use violence and intimidation to forcibly bully and silence dissent. Now, what this law entails is really only comparable in communist states. Um, and the irony about this is we're not talking here about an absolute monarchy akin to Saudi Arabia or Morocco or other absolute monarchies that could be found in the Middle East. Um, Thailand is, in theory, a constitutional monarchy. In theory, the king is merely head of state and it's a parliamentary system, ostensibly not that dissimilar to this one. But the last time Lese Majeste, it's the French word, was prosecuted in the United Kingdom, I believe, was about 1713, shortly after the Glorious Revolution. So this is something that's absolutely archaic, has no place in the 21st century, and in my opinion, it's barbaric, absolutely barbaric, that this woman can, that's a life sentence, because she's 63 years old. So if in theory she went through the whole sentence, she would be 100 and, let me get my math right, 40 plus 63, she'd be 106 if she lives that long before she came out. I suspect that she isn't actually going to have to serve the whole sentence, but I think something will happen. There'll be a royal intervention that often happens. Um, and because the monarchy is so revered, even though it's constitutional, the ruling government usually kind of nods to that. So I hope the king does publicly express mercy in this case and for the others. The questions that Republicans in Thailand and dissidents ask are valid ones. The Thai monarchy is incredibly wealthy. It's one of the richest families in the world, far, far richer than the Windsors. This is in a middle income country. Many Thais are very poor. It's not it's not a desperately poor country on par with some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, but it is a middle income country. So that's a legitimate question. There are legitimate questions over the Thai monarchy's role in politics, which many believe extends far beyond its constitutional role. Um, Here's the thing: we're not talking about someone who was calling for the overthrow of the government or a seditious act. This is a woman who simply shared files 5 years ago. You know, um, I admit that I thought this situation was starting to improve. I didn't even realize the law had been suspended. I thought things had kind of maybe moderated a little, or at least there'd be fewer prosecutions since the new king ascended the throne. But I think the analysis is correct. It's obviously going to send out a message of intimidation and fear. In other words, if we sentence this woman who was merely sharing files to 43 years, if you openly criticize the monarchy, your life's over. This is thuggish tactics. It's incredibly dangerous, and in my opinion, Thailand should be polarized from any sort of forums on democracy, any sort of forums that have human rights at the core. But quite frankly, the human rights situation in the world right now is incredibly grim. We had the optimism of the Arab Spring a decade ago. A lot of that's fizzled out. Um, but when the UN appoints the likes of Saudi Arabia, China, Eritrea, and other such countries onto its human rights body, there is definitely a serious situation here. But there is another argument, which is about Asian values. It was popularized by leaders like Singapore's former Lee Kuan Yew and others. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the whole concept of Asian values is basically an excuse for so-called strongmen to trample basic freedoms. And I reject the idea that it's these pesky Westerners sticking their nose into it, because you have other Asian leaders like South Korea's late Kim Dae-jung, who strongly rejected that idea, who believed in human rights and fought for human rights. Um, so I do not reject this idea of East versus West. I think that's misleading. There are millions of people in the Asian continent who care about human rights, millions in Thailand. But this is a culture of fear. It's profoundly dangerous. And what am I risking by making this video? I might get called a few names by royalists. By the way, I'm not breaking any of the laws myself. As a matter of record, I am making this video within the United Kingdom, and therefore I am not subject to Thai jurisdiction. But I am speaking out. I think it's barbaric. Uh, frankly, I've got a candle vigil going right now because I'm so shocked and disgusted by this. Um, and I'm worried about the absence of those groups online. There was groups, for example, calling for the abolition of Lese Majeste. I don't know what happened to them. That's concerning. Maybe I just need to look harder. But There is one other side to this because this is so severe. Hopefully, governments around the world that believe in freedom and liberty will say something this time. You know, Thailand's a broadly pro-West nation, and that's one of the biggest flaws that we have in the West, kind of turning a blind eye to human rights violators if they happen to be geopolitically aligned with us. Thailand's fairly pro-West, but we should not use that as a way of being silent. In my opinion, we have a responsibility to speak out. And frankly, if countries want to be treated with respect, then they need to earn it. And if a country sentences one of its citizens to 43 years simply for sharing files, that country, that government, rather, doesn't deserve respect. It doesn't. Um, I know that governments always have to consider trade and geopolitics, but I really do think that human rights, it's to me, it's non-negotiable. It is non-negotiable. So I'll be watching this case, and if you're in Thailand and maybe you can't comment for security reasons, maybe you agree with me, but you don't want to say so for those reasons. Just know that there are others out there like me, many people who see how wrong this is, and we stand with you, absolutely. And to royalists, if you're tempted to send me threats, don't waste your time because I'm not going to be easily intimidated. You might say, "Oh, how would you feel if someone offended your queen?" My response to that is I can openly criticise the Queen. The Queen hasn't always got it right. Queen Elizabeth II, in my opinion, has occasionally been out of touch. I can openly criticise her. British newspapers carry cartoons. If we had Lese Majeste in the UK, half the country, a third of the country, would be facing those charges. Thank God we don't have that. Thank goodness for my atheist viewers, we don't have it. Um, this is wrong. It's barbaric. And, Asian values, this isn't Asian values. This is oppression. This is an extreme abuse of power. It's worse even than absolute monarchies. So, you know, Thais who support this law, do not say that you have freedom in Thailand. Do not say that you respect freedom of speech because you don't. At least be honest. Um, And I would actually urge people who really feel as passionately about human rights as I do to think carefully about going on holiday there and rewarding the regime by normalizing it. Although sanctions and that sort of thing have mixed records, but definitely, I think there should be pressure on Bangkok to overturn these absurd laws. One last point to the royalists: if the monarchy is so perfect, if it's so inviolable, then why does it need protected? Why does it need protected? The current king, there is a point with this. The current king doesn't have the cult of personality of his father. He's not as revered as his father, not even close. So possible, it's possible that the wider public won't necessarily jump on board and support this, and I hope that's the case. But that's horrendous. This poor woman must be, terrified of the prospect of spending the rest of her days behind bars. And you know what Thai prisons are like. They've got a reputation for. I mean, she's going to be thrown in with drug dealers and killers. It's horrendous.